So, January 3rd, 2026. The world pretty much wakes up to this absolutely stunning news. U.S. Special Forces are on the ground in Venezuela, and its president is in their custody. It was a swift, dramatic, and, a deeply controversial move that has sent shockwaves across the globe. So, let's break down exactly what just happened, how we even got to this point, and what it all means for the future.
And this quote, it really, really captures the feeling that rippled across the world. For a lot of people, especially in Latin America, this didn't feel like some modern surgical operation. No, it felt like a throwback, like we were seeing a return to a much older, much more aggressive kind of foreign policy. Here's how it all went down. It started in the really early morning hours. We're talking around 2 a.m. local time, when people in the capital, Caracas, were literally shaken out of their beds by a series of huge explosions. That was the start of a very coordinated U.S. air assault.
And then, almost as quickly as it began, the main part of it was over. Just a few hours later, President Donald Trump was on the air, announcing that U.S. forces had captured President Nicolás Maduro. The mission was called Operation Absolute Resolve, and it was unprecedented, not just in its speed, but its target, a sitting head of state.
So you might be asking yourself, how did an operation this massive unfold so quickly? Well, let's take a look at the timeline from that pretty chaotic morning.
The sheer speed of this whole thing it's staggering. I mean, think about it. In a little over 3 hours, the U.S. military went from taking out air defenses to putting special forces on the ground, capturing Maduro, and then having the President of the United States announce it to the world. It was a true lightning-fast strike.
But, that speed definitely came at a human cost. International reports, which have been pulling together data from Venezuelan and Cuban sources, estimate that at least 81 people were killed. And that includes dozens of Venezuelan soldiers, 32 Cuban military and intelligence personnel, and at least 2 civilians who were caught in the crossfire.
Now, this is a really crucial point. This wasn't framed as an act of war. Instead, Maduro and his wife were immediately flown to New York. Why? Well, the administration's official story was that this was a law enforcement action. The whole point, they said, was to bring an indicted narco-terrorist to justice in a U.S. federal court.
To really get why the global reaction, especially from Latin America, was so intense, we've got to look back a little bit. For so many people in the region, this operation didn't just happen out of nowhere. It felt like this painful echo from a very long and complicated history of intervention.
And it really all starts right here, with a policy that's nearly 200 years old. See, the Monroe Doctrine was originally meant to keep European powers out of the Americas, but over time, it was sort of reinterpreted to justify the United States acting as the hemisphere's policeman, stepping in whenever and wherever it felt it needed to. And right from the beginning, U.S. influence was backed up by force. The Mexican-American War ended with Mexico losing a massive chunk of its land. We're talking territory that is now California, Nevada, Utah, and parts of a bunch of other states.
And this is a pattern you see again and again throughout history. The U.S. steps in, supposedly to help, but the result is some kind of long-term strategic win. In this case, a permanent naval base on Cuban soil.
Now, this invasion of Panama, this is probably the closest parallel in history to what we just saw. Just like with Maduro, the U.S. used drug laws as the justification for invading a sovereign country to capture its leader. And this whole history, well, it sets the stage for the really complex mix of motivations behind the strike on Venezuela. So, what were the official reasons given for this intervention? And what do critics think were the real motivations? Well, the answers seem to be tangled up in this potent mix of oil, drugs, and just raw geopolitical power.
So right away, you've got these two competing stories. The official line from the U.S. is that this was basically a police action against a criminal state. But a lot of the world sees it very differently. They point to Venezuela's huge oil reserves, the biggest on the entire planet, and they call it a power grab for resources, plain and simple.
And the U.S. administration, well, they weren't exactly shy about their economic plans. Pretty soon after the operation, they announced this energy deal. And what it does is it effectively gives the U.S. control over selling Venezuela's oil, with all the money flowing into U.S.-controlled bank accounts before it gets distributed.
But not everyone is convinced this is some kind of economic masterstroke. A memo from the German Council on Foreign Relations pointed out that Venezuela's oil industry is basically in ruins. Its crude oil is what they call extra heavy, which makes it really expensive to produce and refine. So it could be a really bad investment, especially in a world that's slowly trying to move away from fossil fuels.
Okay, so with Nicolás Maduro now in a New York jail cell, a massive power vacuum has just opened up in Caracas. So who's in charge now? And what does the future actually hold for the country?
Well, the person who stepped in is Maduro's own vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, and critics are calling this Madurism without Maduro, basically meaning the same authoritarian system is still there, just with a different face at the top. The state, the security forces, the political alliances that kept Maduro in power, they're all still in place. And it's really important to note that Rodriguez herself has been implicated by human rights groups in the government's past repression.
Now, the U.S. has laid out this three-phase roadmap for Venezuela. It's supposed to start with stabilization, then move to recovery, and then, in theory, end with a democratic transition. But the reality on the ground, well, it shows that even step one is going to be full of challenges.
I mean, just take the issue of political prisoners. As a goodwill gesture, the new government released 139 detainees, which sounds good, right? But human rights groups estimate there were over 1,000 being held. So that means the vast majority, we're talking nearly 86%, are still behind bars. So, not surprisingly, an action this drastic has just fractured global opinion. It's triggered really powerful and conflicting reactions from just about every corner of the world.
And the responses are truly all over the map. While you had Venezuelan exiles celebrating in the streets of Miami, you had United Nations officials and legal experts immediately condemning the strike as a violation of international law. Thousands protested in neighboring countries, worried all this instability could spill across their borders. And then, behind the scenes, U.S. and Venezuelan diplomats have already started cautious exploratory talks. And all of this, it leads us to the central, unresolved question here. With the leader gone, but the system still in place, is Venezuela actually on a path to a real, true democratic transition? Or has it simply swapped one authoritarian for another? The answer to that is going to define the nation's future.